Welcome back from lunch, everybody. This is vegetable oil car that, as long as we have it here, we can talk about it. So, diesel engines built around the turn of the century by a guy named Rudolph Diesel were designed so that farmers could power them off of agricultural wastes. They could run off a whole variety of things, everything from vegetable oils to coal dust to mineral oil, and today still can. The diesel engine is different from the gasoline engine. Well, they're very different types of fuel. Gasoline is far more combustible. The gasoline engines have a spark plug and make a little spark that ignites gasoline vapors and expands in the cylinder, and that's what powers the engine. Diesel engines don't have spark plugs. They work off of compression. There's a cylinder, just like in a gas engine, but instead of making a spark, it actually compresses that fuel and puts it under extremely high temperatures and pressure, and that's what causes it to explode. Diesel fuel, if you ever seen it, it's quite viscous. It's very thick, and it's actually quite a bit safer to handle than gasoline. It's much less explosive. You can actually, don't try this at home, but you can throw a match into a barrel of diesel fuel and it will probably not ignite. You actually, have to, if you do that to a barrel of gasoline, the vapors will ignite before the match even touches the fuel and the whole thing will kaboom. So in that regard, it's safer than winter. And if you've ever seen vegetable oil in the cold, it solidifies. It turns into something like frozen jello, like a frozen block. And if you can imagine your fuel lines being clogged with the frozen material, it's not going to flow through them, and your engine's not going to turn over if you have a solid material in there. So we need to do something to it to reduce its viscosity so it will flow more nicely and reduce its freezing temperature. So that can be done in one of two ways. One is by making a fuel called biodiesel, which is essentially, it's vegetable oil. It's what we call a triglyceride. You can almost imagine it as a letter E. When you make biodiesel, you take vegetable oil and you subject it to a chemical process involving lye and methanol. It's called transesterification. What it does is basically breaks off one of the branches on that E and makes it look like an F. So your fat molecule then looks like an F. It's smaller and its viscosity is permanently reduced. And its freezing temperature is reduced somewhat. Biodiesel will still gel, but generally at a lower temperature than vegetable oil. And keep in mind, different vegetable oils gel at different temperatures. Palm oil will turn solid at about 50 degrees. Canola oil, quite a bit lower than that. So that extra E, that line that got broken off the E, that extra stuff, that actually gets turned into something called glycerin, which can be used to make soap. So, there's biodiesel, and that you can run that in any diesel engine with just one tank. You can put it in there, and during the warmer the months of the year, just run off biodiesel, and that's fine. I personally, I'm not interested in it because I don't want to work with methanol and lye. They're both nasty and dangerous as hell. And it's just, it's a process, and I don't know. I got other things to do. But the other way to run vegetable oil in a car is to heat it. And as long as vegetable oil is hot, it's going to stay liquid and viscous and flowing. That's what I've done here with this car. Instead of modifying the fuel itself, I just modify the endpoint technology. This car has got two gas tanks. It's got over here on the side a regular old diesel fuel tank in which goes diesel fuel. But in the trunk, I've got another fuel tank, and that's where the vegetable oil goes. So what I'll do is, when I actually have vegetable oil in the tank, which I don't think I have much in there right now, is I'll start the engine on diesel, which you know, can be in the cold of winter. I mean, sometimes a diesel engine can be a pain to start by itself. I mean, you have good batteries and change your oil and all that. But generally, it will start in the winter okay. And the car generates heat. And under the hood, we've got the radiator, where you've got antifreeze, this toxic green liquid that flows through our vehicles. Picks up the heat from the engine and runs through a hose across the bottom of the car, goes into this fuel tank, and there's a little copper coil in there. That's a heat exchanger. The hot coolant flows through there, and it heats up the vegetable oil. Makes it nice and hot and liquid and flowing. So after a while, after the car's been running on diesel for a while, I could throw a switch, which you can see right on the console in there. That will make it switches some valves under the hood. That will have it run off of just vegetable oil. And when it burns, and I actually have a temperature sensor there, so I know what the temperature is of the oil coming in. You ideally want it to be, they say, 160 degrees. I've never gotten it that hot in this car. The thing about the Jettas, they're incredibly efficient cars. I mean, this car gets 50 miles to the gallon on diesel. 50.
What about on vegetable oil?
The same. Yeah. But because it is so efficient, it doesn't produce that much waste heat. So I've never gotten it to successfully bring oil up that hot, but I haven't had problems with it either. I've put, I don't know, 40 or 50,000 miles on this car in vegetable oil and haven't had any issues. I also have a Ford F-250, this big ass pickup truck that is anything but efficient. Gets probably 18 miles to the gallon and produces a ton of waste heat. But it then therefore is easily able to get the vegetable oil up to 160 degrees or more. And that's where it matters more when you have something that uses a lot of fuel, I think. But so I can run on vegetable oil. It makes a pleasant smell, like barbecue maybe, or French fries. I've had dogs come and like bite the tailpipe thinking it's food, trying to get in there. And then before I shut down the engine, that switch, it's a three-way rocker switch on the console there. I'll flip it onto the purge setting, and what that does is that pushes diesel fuel through the hoses and pushes all the vegetable oil out of the engine and back into the vegetable oil tank, plus a little bit of diesel. So that way, when you start the next time, you're sure you only got diesel under there. Because if you forget to do that and it's a cold night, you're going to be out there in the morning with a hairdryer under your engine blocks trying to heat it up enough. It's happened. It's not fun.
Anticipate, you're like, okay, I'm going to be home in 15 miles. I have to hit the purge switch now.
This car purges fast, like 30 to 60 seconds is what I usually give it. So I'll usually just sit there and let it idle for 30 to 60 seconds, and that's enough to purge it out. In the winter, I'll do like an extra long purge just to be sure. But sometimes in the summer, I don't even bother. I just leave it on veg. When I lived in Texas, I could just drive for months and never purge it.
Did you do the conversion yourself, Scott? And how much might it cost if you want to buy all these parts?
Me and a friend, my friend, a good friend of mine, he happens to be a master Volkswagen mechanic. Good friend to have. Now he and I did it together, so it was good to have him there to make sure I wasn't doing anything horribly wrong. The conversion process is, you don't really have to know that much about mechanics per se. It's more like plumbing and wiring that you're doing, and a little, I mean, you need to identify a couple of things on the engine, which if you have a rudimentary understanding of mechanics, you can probably do. But nonetheless, it's you really want to know what you're doing, because if you screw it up, you can mess up the car real bad. If you don't want to, you don't have the time, or don't feel confident, you can take it to Grease Car right here in Northampton and make an appointment. I don't know how much they charge.
It was about $1,000.
$1,000 for the conversion. Which, you know, depending on how much you drive, you could make that back pretty fast. The kit itself is probably also run around $1,000. If you knew what you're doing, you could buy the individual components for quite a bit less. It's convenient to buy it all at once as a kit, though, from Grease Car. and they make a kit that's designed for this climate. Other companies that make them are other places where it's warmer, and they understand, I think, what it takes to operate a grease car in this climate. Which, you know, let's be honest, in the winter it gets tough, and a lot of times in the winter I don't even bother. It's just too much to have to go and heat up the oil to filter it. Because here's the thing with oil. I pick it up from a restaurant called Bombers, which is a burrito restaurant, and they use it for deep frying all kinds of stuff, you know, French fries. And there's all kinds of bits of French fries and chunk and gunk in there, and you have to filter it. You can't just put that in there because that will clog the filters in your injectors immediately. The simplest way to filter it is to pour it through these big things. They look like big socks. They're big filter bags, and that will do a good job of filtering out most of the junk. I now use a centrifuge, which is does a much better job of filtering it, and it's an automated process, which is really nice. I just flip some switches and walk away from it and come back in an hour and it's done. Depends on what scale you're doing it on now. I mean, I've been doing this for years, and I finally got a system that's pretty much streamlined and works, which is great, because it used to be a real pain to filter the stuff. And the thing is, the vegetable oil, it's got to be warm if you're going to filter it. You got to heat it up, because if it's cold and solid, it's not pouring through that sock. It is just going to glop up at the bottom. So if you have a heated space like a garage, that's great. But I don't. I have a cold garage. What I've done is I've made these insulated boxes that are big enough to hold 6 5-gallon vegetable oil cubes. The thing is, it's messy. It can be really messy. If you have a spill, and no matter how careful you are, you're always going to have a spill. Something's going to happen, and it makes a big mess. And I've gotten in big trouble for having spills inside the house, you know, spills in the trunk. I once had a container, and the plastic just got brittle or something, and the whole thing dumped in the trunk. Stacy was not happy at all.
Does this pass inspection?
What's that?
Does it pass inspection?
Yeah, I've never had a problem with it because well, at least in New York State, diesels are not required to pass emission because there's no way they're going to pass, so they're exempt. But plenty of people do in California. I mean, yeah. I mean, actually, the emissions are considerably better than that from diesel fuel. There's no sulfur dioxide in there at all. There's no sulfur in vegetable oil, so there's no SOx. Yeah, I mean, this is not any kind of solution to energy or transportation issues at all. In any given town, there's a limited quantity of waste oil that's produced, and you know, there's a handful of people who are resourceful enough to collect that and use it. But it is extremely limited. I mean, really, the best thing I can say about this is that I've saved some money, and it's kind of selfish and personal. But you know, for people who want to collect this stuff and use it, great. But it's not going to be the solution to world energy problems at all, just because it's a limited quantity. And just, yeah, like the whole issue with biofuels, there's been an enormous backlash against them because a lot of potentially arable land, particularly in countries in the global south, is being used for production of corn or soy to produce biodiesel or ethanol for consumers in the north, that, you know, previously was being used to produce food. And the food riots that happened a couple years ago, that was definitely one of the contributing factors to it, was the increased demand for biofuels. In the post-petroleum era, our energy resources are going to be limited to what is provided for by the sun. And on the surface area of the planet, we're going to have to decide what is going to be used, you know, what's going to be forest, what's going to be for food crops, what's going to be for fuel crops, and that's going to have to be figured out. You know, I mean, in a sustainable system, yeah, I mean, I can see, you know, you have like a small area that's designated to grow an oil-producing crop that you're squeezing oil from to power maybe some farm machinery with or something. But is everyone going to be able to commute 2 hours a day into the city and back to the suburbs on it? No way.
So I mean, as long as we're aware of its limitations.